What poker software does a professional poker player use these days? How's it going, and welcome back to Andreas Fröhlich Poker. In today's video I'm going to go into the 4 software types that I think are the most valuable to improve your poker game. Let's get into it. Number 1 is going to be a tracker. I use Hold'em Manager 2 because I think it's the most intuitive program out there. And what Hold'em Manager does is it stores all my hands that I've played, and I can later on look at the whole database and analyze it. I do analyze this database by using a filter in Hold'em Manager, and then using that filter I look at a very specific area of my game. For instance, when I raise on the button and I get called by the big blind, no matter whether it is in Hold'em or in Pot Limit Omaha, I can understand how well I'm doing in that situation overall. And if the win rate compared to, for example, the win rate of friends who are also playing the game is not good in that situation, I can then work at that very specific situation by looking at examples of my database. I think that's a much better approach to learn in poker than just randomly picking the biggest pots that you've played. Look at your online database with a tool like Hold'em Manager and try to figure out an area that you're leaking in right now and work on your game that way. Number 2 is going to be equity tools. What I use, and also I think it's quite crucial to a beginner who tries to improve at poker, is going to be a program called Equity Battle. You can download it on your mobile, and for instance, you can go into Omaha, and then you basically start this lesson here, and you're going to be asked about a pre-flop situation that you can solve, and then you have to do it in a very short amount of time frame. For example, you have Ace King 7-4 against 10-4 3 deuce, and you know you're a bit of a favorite, but he has, I think, 3 live cards. So let's say you're about like a 62% favorite here, and this is not staged, but it is 62%. So funny that it was exactly 62 because I wasn't so sure. But at the same time, doing those equity calculations again and again, you're going to improve your understanding of how often a poker hand is winning against another one. So doing equity calculations in Hold'em in Omaha is super important, not just the pre-flop one, but then also going into post-flop situations where you also try to estimate your equity and then train that for 10 minutes a day. It will help you out a lot. And I think not using that software is just ridiculous. You know, at some point, especially as a beginner, as I said, you should use that and try to train your understanding of poker equity, one of the most important factors in poker. Number 3 are going to be solver-based programs, namely PL Solver, Cheatorp, and Simple Postflop. I use PL Solver, but you can use whatever program you want. And the most important thing that you have to be aware of about these programs is that you don't try to emulate exactly what the solver is doing, because it's impossible. You're a human being. You don't want to try to copy what a computer is doing, but instead look at the output from a solver and learn to understand it. If you cannot understand it, get a coach who can teach you about solver programs and solver output in order for you to understand certain patterns that solvers will show. Whether it is in No Limit Hold'em or PLO, they can teach you a lot about the game and how you can approach the game, then constructing your own strategy from the solver output. Trying to look at the very complicated output from the solver and then making the strategy simple and implementable is the number one thing I learned from solvers, and I think you should do the same, because you just cannot just copy it. Number 4 are going to be pre-flop charts or pre-flop quiz type programs and game trees. First of all, I want to talk about the pre-flop charts and quizzes. There are more and more programs coming out that ask you about certain actions pre-flop or even on the flop that are often based on solver output, but then now they just ask you to take a certain action in a quiz format. I think those programs are super useful for a lot of players, because then you can train yourself of taking the right action. The only thing that you also additionally have to do is you have to know the why behind it, and then it's certainly good if you have someone who teaches you about it, or you try to understand and ask people or yourself why a certain action is better than the other. And the second one is going to be game trees or game tree programs. When you have, for example, Heads Up No Limit Hold'em, the game is so complicated because you have a lot of hands before the flop, and now your job in No Limit Hold'em Heads Up is to put all your hands in different lines. You've probably heard quite a bit about about that line check when people post hands on a forum. What line should I have taken? Well, you have a lot of lines. You can, for example, bet the flop, bet the turn, bet the river. You can bet the flop, check the turn, and then bet the river. Or you can take any other line. And the key to poker is to put all your hands into those different lines, and then also do that so optimally that your opponent cannot exploit you, and that you're going to make the most money with all your hands. What a lot of people do wrong, and I think that's what I learned from game trees and pre-flop programs, is that, for example, they put a lot of hands into the wrong line. For example, in pre-flop, a lot of people, they 3-bet too much, and then they cannot have certain hands in their cold call range anymore. We call that so-called being capped to certain hands. For example, in No Limit Hold'em, if somebody doesn't 3-bet you, then it's likely he doesn't have aces or kings or queens or jacks or something like that, right? So the range is going to be capped to those hands, and therefore you don't have to be afraid that the person has those hands anymore. And then when it comes to game trees, the same thing happens again, because think about someone who always bets the flop with a flush draw. Well, his game tree mistake is that on the flop, he bets all his flush draws. So in his checking line, so let's say he has the option to bet and to check. So when he goes check back, or when he does check back on the flop, he cannot have those flush draws anymore, because his game tree choice is going to be that he bets all of them. So he makes a game tree cut that is so strong that you can then exploit part of your opponent's game tree that way. And to think in poker in terms of a game tree, if you have that skill, or if you train that skill and make it better, it's going to be a big advantage over your opponents, because you're going to realize how their strategy looks like in a game tree format. Which poker software do you use to improve your poker game? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you have some more interest on any of the tools that I've talked about in this video, so I can make a follow-up video and a tutorial maybe. So let me know in the comment section below, and also don't forget to hit the thumbs up to support the channel. Thanks a lot in advance, and subscribe to it if you want to see more updates in the future. This has been Andreas, and see you in the next video.